Hi, I'm the Pauper guy, and today I'm talking about a deck I've built I call Mono Red Monarch. If you haven't already seen the general information video, there's a link in the description that can tell you a little bit more about the deck before I launch into the specifics here. So, if you've watched the other video, you might be asking yourself, why not just play Burn? It's definitely faster and deadlier, but I play Pauper because it's fun, and this deck has been super fun to play. I'm going to talk about the core engine for a second. This deck uses Merchant of the Veil and Thrill of Possibility to pitch cards like Fiery Temper and Alchemist Greeting, and sometimes Firebolt, to then also get full value out of them using Madness. You get this really great removal package that is also drawing cards at the same time and is pretty mana efficient. Haggle for 1 mana plus Fiery Temper for a 2nd mana is basically 2 mana, deal 3 damage, draw a card. Thrill of Possibility plus Alchemist Greeting is spend 4 mana, draw 2 cards. Merchant of the Veil, you can also use the activated ability, pay 3, discard a card, draw a card in the late game. It's a good way to continue using it, and in fact, losing all of your Merchants of the Veil late game can be kind of a bottleneck for the deck. We don't usually discard many lands because late game, with Merchant of the Veil's discard ability, we can use all of that mana. There have been games I've had where I play 10 or more lands, and I am still tapping out half the time, using all my mana in a turn sometimes. So this deck completely annihilates creature-based strategies, but it kind of struggles against counter magic. Tron and Burn are particularly rough matchups. It doesn't care about its own creatures, too, which is a little bit odd, other than Merchant of the Veil. So it also kind of blanks creature removal. Like, Mono Black Control can kill most of the creatures that we play, but the deck doesn't care that much. It's fine. So really quickly, I'm going to look at each card individually here. Merchant of the Veil's Haggle ability is maybe like why this deck works, why it exists at all. Merchant of the Veil and Thrill of Possibility are definitely the reason that I was able to build this deck in its current form at this point in time. There's a new card that came out of Theros that's a 2-mana version of Merchant of the Veil. It's a 1/3 and it has the same activated ability. However, Merchant of the Veil's Haggle ability, being able to do it the first time for 1 mana, is a really big deal, and I've gotten a lot of use out of it. I almost always use Haggle before I play Merchant of the Veil. Thrill of Possibility 2, the instant speed nature of both Merchant and Thrill means that suddenly all of my burn and interaction, save for Firebolt, is instant speed. This makes a big difference when you're facing creature-based strategies or just holding mana for end turn in general. I get to play like a real control deck instead of using something like Faithless Looting or Cathartic Reunion or Tormenting Voice, which are all sorcery speed, even though they're pretty good value. So the deck also plays Lightning Bolt, which is a no-brainer of an include, but Fiery Temper and Alchemist Greeting are the other half of the value engine. These cards are solid removal, and Alchemist Greeting being 4 damage instead of 3 is a really big deal sometimes. Firebolt in general is just a really good card. It's kind of like a Chainer's Edict in that you play it early, you take care of a creature. Late game, you're probably going to get value too. Spending 5 mana is a lot, but you know that late Chainer's Edict can really make a difference, and that late Firebolt can really make a difference too. Martyr of Ashes. God, this card is bonkers strong. It is really, really good. This can shut down an aggro deck single-handedly by completely wiping the board. The only reason that Martyr of Ashes doesn't already see consistent play is because you have to have a number of red cards in your hand in order for it to work. You basically have to already be playing a mono-red deck or a deck that is heavily red, and the only decks that do that are commonly played in Pauper are Red Deck Wins and Burn. And I know that Burn plays Martyr of Ashes in the sideboard sometimes, but this deck, being a control deck, it can mainboard it, and it can definitely make a difference. So, the big card of the hour, Crown-Hunter Hireling. Man, this card is really bad. This might actually be the worst Monarch card in all of Magic the Gathering. It gives you the Monarch, but it is basically a 4/4 for 5 with Defender. So, but the deck needs this card. It has to have it. Like, this is what really gives the deck its top end. Suddenly you're drawing 2 cards a turn, and you move to your end step, and you draw another card, and oftentimes you can cast that card during your opponent's turn, or you can pitch it using a Merchant of the Veil you have on board. It's just really handy, and it lets you completely control out a whole variety of decks. So Burn Trail and Spire Barrage are the newest additions to the deck, and they're okay cards. Spire Barrage is kind of cute because it's like a red version of Corrupt, except it doesn't gain you life, so it's like an impressive finisher. But it is sorcery speed, and it is 5 mana. Burn Trail is 4 mana for 3 damage, but if you have 2 red creatures on the board, and they have to be red, you can tap them to Conspire it and deal 3 damage twice, so 6 damage total. The thought is to use cards like Martyr of Ashes, the Crown-Hunter Hireling, because it can't attack anyways, and like the tokens from Dwarven Mine, and you can get pretty good value that way out of Burn Trail. It's a way to burn through and end the game, or to get 2 lightning bolts out of 1 card. From a previous version of the deck, I did leave in 4 Pillage. So previously I was playing a lot of land destruction, and I took out most of it, but I left in Pillage because it hits artifacts too, and I've been finding that some games, even just blowing up 1 land, can make a really big difference, especially against other mid-range decks. The mana base is pretty simple. You could literally just slot in 22 mountains and you'd be doing okay. But since we're in 1 color, and since it's red, and since things are straightforward, we get to play a couple of nice things. We can play some Radiant Fountains because that helps our matchups against burn and aggro at least a little bit. And we can play a bunch of Dwarven Mines, which are another new card from Eldraine, which gives you a 1/1 if it's the 4th mountain or later that you've played. You have to have at least 3 other mountains, and then it'll come into play untapped, and it'll give you a free 1/1 red dwarf creature, which can be really handy. Alright, so in the sideboard, we have Red Elemental Blast. This is a no-brainer. It's just really good against blue, and I think it's really important because some of the weaker matchups here are decks that run a lot of counter magic, so it's a very handy card. Flaring Pain I have a 1 of as an include because there have been times when I've seen people bring in Circle of Protection Red. And Circle of Protection Red is not necessarily the end of the game, but it does make winning a lot harder all of a sudden. You have to either be pressuring them with a whole bunch of creatures so that they have to pay 1 for every single creature that attacks, or you have to wait until they do some big thing, and then during your turn or the end of their turn, you have to try to play like 20 spells at once. It doesn't work very well. So Flaring Pain is included for cards like Circle of Protection Red and Prismatic Strands. In the case of Circle of Protection Red, you have to play around it really carefully because it won't allow them to save their creatures. Circle of Protections only prevent damage to the player. So you can still control out their board, but you do have to wait until you have Flaring Pain or wait until they don't have enough mana to deal with all your sources of damage before you try to force them through. There's only 1 Flaring Pain included because it has flashback, and it's not usually the case that you need to worry about damage being prevented. It's a pretty fringe case. There's 3 Electrickery. This is because this deck tries to trade 1-for-1 with creatures usually, but strategies that go wide or have a lot of flyers can kind of struggle. Martyr of Ashes doesn't hit flying creatures. So fairies can be an issue, especially if there's a bunch of them early and they have Spellstutter sprites. Elves can explode incredibly quickly, and decks like Boros Bully can play a whole bunch of flyers. So Electrickery just kind of helps with all of that. Faerie Macabre is... it's a sad attempt at trying to deal with decks like Tron and other decks that get value from their graveyard. Tron is a really rough matchup, and the most recent version of the deck has been adapted to include a little bit more burn to try to just burn Tron out instead of trying to destroy their lands. But Faerie Macabre, in the Tron matchup at least, you don't want to worry about anything except trying to counter their Pulse of Marasa, because if you invalidate the Pulse of Marasa target, then the spell will fizzle and they won't gain 6 life, and that's basically all you really care about. Peace Strider is a poor attempt at trying to find some way to deal with burn. This card has won me some games against burn where the burn player also got unlucky. It allows you to gain a little bit of life and also put a 3/3 body on the board, which speeds up your own clock, but basically you just have to get lucky against burn. Previous versions of the deck included a lot more land destruction. Currently there's 4 mainboard land destruction spells and none in the sideboard. Previously there were 7 land destruction spells in the mainboard, and there were 4 land destruction spells in the sideboard that all had flashback. So you were running a really large land destruction package. The issue with this is that the primary targets well, I should say the primary target was Tron. And the land destruction here moves too slowly, and Tron can eventually find the lands anyways. I've had matches against Tron with a land destruction heavy version of this deck where I blew up 4 of their lands, and they still eventually managed to stabilize. They still eventually managed to claw their way back out, because I wasn't putting a clock on Tron. I wasn't pressuring them really hard, and I just gave them time to recover, and they got there. In addition, Tron holds a lot of counter magic and a lot of ways to, like Pulse of Marasa, to get a land back out of their graveyard and play it again. So I ended up cutting land destruction, leaving in the Pillage to see if it gets value regardless, but overall I'm not trying to do land destruction anymore. I'm just trying to move faster. I will say that the land destruction version of this deck was even better against other mid-range decks, which it already has a pretty good matchup against. I had matches against Mono Black Control and Boros Bully that were just soul-crushing, like taking them off of every single one of their lands before basically swinging a bunch of turns in a row and killing them. I even got a couple of surprise wins against Burn because I hit 2 or 3 of their lands and they hadn't killed me yet, and then they just couldn't draw into more lands because they don't run that many in the deck, but I'm pretty sure that was more of a fluke than anything else. If it turns out that consistent land destruction is a viable strategy against Burn, I will 100% throw the lever and go right back to land destruction with this deck, I swear to God. So, let's look at some individual matchups. Mono Green Stompy. Playing against Stompy is really straightforward. You just have to hold interaction and play around the defensive spells that they have, like Hunger of the Howpack and Vines of Vastwood. If you trade 1-for-1 cards with Stompy, you're going to win. If the Stompy player is smart, they'll try to stick one creature and then protect it. But at the end of the day, you've got more pieces of interaction than they're going to have defensive spells, and you just need to pick a point at which you're sure that you can win the stack war. If you don't win the stack war and they get to resolve like 2 Hunger of the Howpacks on a creature, then yeah, you might be in trouble. But overall, this is a really good matchup for you. Izzet Delver / Fairies. So with Izzet Fairies and Delver, one of the things, a piece of advice I would give about dealing with this deck in general, if you're playing any sort of deck that's heavy on control or is heavy on interaction, the thing about this deck is it absolutely needs its creatures to win. It can't generate value unless it has creatures. The only ways that the deck has to generate card advantage is Spellstutter Sprite and Ninja of the Deep Hours. So, or Faerie Miscreant too, kind of. But Spellstutter Sprite gets a 2-for-1 if it gets to counter something when it comes in, and Ninja of the Deep Hours draws a card every time. But if every single time that Izzet Delver plays a creature, you kill it, the deck can't do anything. They can hold up counter magic, but again, you have lots of removal, lots of cheap removal. So you just need to play around Spellstutter Sprite, basically, and try to keep them off of having any creatures at all, and you can win pretty easily. Tron. Right, so this is really rough. You're not quite fast enough to consistently get under Tron. You can start with early creature aggro until they get to their fog effects, and then you can switch to throwing burn spells at their face and hold back your Faerie Macabre to try to counter the Pulse of Marasa when they play it. It might also be worth using a Faerie Macabre to prevent them from getting a Hydroblast back, because that card is wicked. It counters your entire deck. But overall, countering a Pulse of Marasa is usually the highest value thing you can do with a Faerie Macabre, and it's worth holding on to for as long as you have it in your hand. Mono Black Control. So Mono Black Control it's a variety of decks at this point. There's a whole spectrum of different types of Mono Black Control you can play. If they've got creatures, then chances are they're doing something to do with Grey Merchant of Asphodel. And if they're playing a bunch of creatures and getting value that way, just kill the creatures. Maybe they draw cards off of Phyrexian Rager. Maybe they're gonna make you put cards back on top of the deck with Chittering Rats. It's okay. Kill their creatures as they come, and eventually they will kind of just run out of things to do. Their removal is not great against you because you don't care that much about your creatures. However, if Mono Black Control is playing little to no creatures, then you want to be throwing more of your burn spells at the face, and you kind of want to just try to burn them down as fast as you can, because Mono Black Control decks that are running less creatures, chances are running things like Corrupt, and they're going to try to nickel and dime you down. Maybe they also play Grey Merchant, maybe they don't, but at the end of the day, they're going to try to like burn you out with Pestilence and Corrupt, and something along those lines. So it's better for you to be a little bit proactive if they're not playing a lot of creatures and start throwing burn at their face. So mono blue control or decks like Oops All Instants. Counter Magic is really tough for this deck to deal with, but if you remember a couple things, you'll probably be okay. If you try to do a bunch of things in one turn, it's hard for Counter Magic to deal with it, so that's one way to try to force through spells. And another thing to keep in mind is if they're playing the tempo game, they're going to try to stick one creature or one piece of time, something that's going to pressure you, right? Like a Delver or a single fairy or something along those lines. You are really good with this deck at slowing down tempo decks, and you have a wide array of 1 and 2 mana removal. So it's pretty easy for you to force through a piece of removal to kill their one creature that they stick. Basically, just try to play around what you think might be coming with them and keep them off of their clock, because these decks don't run a lot of win conditions, especially if it's something like Oops All Instants. If you control their creatures, they don't have another win condition, and the game can drag way out, and you have better ways of getting long game value than they do. Boros Bully. This is kind of similar to the Izzet Delver / Fairies matchup in that you want to try to keep their creature count as low as possible. Boros Bully is trying to reach a critical mass where they have a whole bunch of creatures on board, and then they use Rally the Peasants to swing for like 15 or more, some insane amount. Boros Bully is a little bit difficult because you don't have a way to deal with their 1/1 flyers before you bring in Electrickery, and you basically are reduced to spending your Lightning Bolts and your Fiery Tempers and your removal spells one at a time to trade into these flyers that you can't do anything else about. Their ground creatures aren't as big of a deal because you'll be able to block them with Crown-Hunter Hireling or completely wipe them out with Martyr of Ashes. But you do have to sometimes trade really inefficiently into Boros Bully and just spend way more spells than you would think killing off their flyers. And you can still get there if you can manage to get the Monarch and keep the board clear in the meantime. Burn. All I can really say about Burn is good luck. There's very few ways to win against this deck. If you get lucky and you hit one of their lands with a Pillage and they don't have another one as a backup, maybe you win that way. Maybe you just move faster than them. Maybe they brick because it's Burn and they can just get unlucky. But basically, you just got to go as fast as you absolutely can and hope to God the Burn player doesn't have a good hand. Affinity. This deck is so good against Affinity. It's really weird because people who play Affinity are not used to encountering decks that can just easily deal with all their 4/4s. So Alchemist Greeting is a cheap and efficient way to kill most of the creatures in Affinity. Crown-Hunter Hireling, being a 4/4, means that it trades with Affinity's 4/4s and is totally fine that way. Sometimes with Affinity, you just have to be ready to spend 2 removal spells to deal with the 4/4, but that's also okay because you're going to outdraw them in the long run. The only thing that this deck cannot deal with that Affinity uses is a Togfling. If they get in a Togfling off, you just lose. But you can oftentimes move faster than that, or they have to find specifically those cards, and Affinity does lean pretty heavily on its 4/4s. Slivers. This matchup is tricky. I had a rough matchup once where my opponent 2-0'd me, despite the fact that I got Martyr of Ashes both games, because he was able to reload really efficiently with Winding Way and lead the Stampede. So in theory, I think this matchup is very good. You can trade with their creatures before they get too big. You can use Martyr of Ashes to get a super high value board wipe at some point. But you do have to be wary that even though you think you've got the deck on the back legs and you've got the Monarch, they can still use cards like Lead the Stampede and Winding Way to claw their way back out of having no creatures on board. Elves and Bogles. I haven't actually played against either of them yet, but I expect the matchup to be pretty decent. Martyr of Ashes' main board is good against both of these decks, and Electrickery in the sideboard means you're going to have more relevant cards than most decks have to deal with either of these. Just the fact that you have more relevant cards to deal with these two decks means that you're in a better position than most decks to deal with them, and trading 1-for-1 into elves in a lot of games is actually just fine, unless they explode and get like 30 elves on the board, then you're screwed. That's all I've got for now. Please leave a comment and let me know what you think about the videos, and thanks for watching.